Hello, I am Marilyn. I'm an alcoholic. And thank you, Karen, for that very kind introduction. And it is good to see there goes Kat. To see a grand sponsee here, Kathy. Welcome. So good to see you. Yes, I come from Los Angeles. I'm a member of the big Pacific group there. And my sobriety date is February 8th, 1972. So this program has kept me sober now for over 52 years. So by that, you know that I am a very old person, but I can tell you I am still spry. And I will tell you a little bit about what it was like, what happened, and I hope tell you about what it's like today. Today is really fun, just by the way. On the 27th of this month, next Monday, I will be going to Japan with some AA friends. We're going to be speaking at a conference there in Tokyo. And it's all because of the pandemic that exists out of such a terrible thing, people getting sick and dying all over the world. We began to talk to one another with these virtual meetings. And one of these things was a virtual outreach to Japan. And there's a person in our group who's highly fluent in both English and Japanese, and she can do interpretations. So it grew from a little meeting of 5 people at the beginning of the pandemic now to many, many people in Tokyo who have formed the Tokyo Pacific Group. It is a sister group of our very own group, and they're having their second annual conference. So you just never know, but this is an example of what I've run into so often in sobriety, and that is something that seems so dreadful, so terrible, can turn out to be absolutely essential for my recovery or wonderfully important in terms of my recovery in the program. I started out, as many of us do, just barreling toward hopelessness. And for me, it took the form of first wanting to be a scientist. And I thought if I could become a scientist, maybe win the Nobel Prize, then I'd finally get some respect. I was kind of like Rodney Dangerfield, this old stand-up comic who used to talk about not getting no respect. And I thought, that's the story of my life. I was trying to get people to like me, to respect me. So I lost all hope for that because I was so socially inept and such a misfit. But I thought at least if I could be among scientists, I could learn that esoteric language and at least I'd have some friends. Well, I went away to school thanks to my mom who saved some money and got a job in a lab and met Bill. Bill was a real scientist, and I knew he was a real scientist because he had a white lab coat and he had a slide rule in his pocket, and he was just so wonderful. He could write equations on a chalkboard. He went off to a meeting in Washington and sent me a postcard, which I kept and I have to this day in a red velvet box. And it said, I thought about what you were saying, but all I can come up with is, and he wrote out this elegant partial differential equation. And no man had ever talked to me like that before. And I could talk to him. It was fate. In fact, the first time I saw him, I kind of knew that he was the one. It was a cosmic thing. I'm sure it was ordained in some other lifetime or some mystical way. So I thought that much later, after we got together, I asked him, what was your thought when you met me? I just thought he must have had the same kind of thing, that this is soulmate and a cosmic thing. But his thought was, she is a sexy little thing. Well, um, my sponsor once said, Marilyn, that is the way men think. So, but as I mentioned, I could talk with him, he could talk with me, we could talk about weird things, but one day he said, do you want to get married? and we went off to Ohio. His dad was a Lutheran minister, although we were, I just saw Teresa Kelly. I'm sorry. I was just so happy to see you, Kelly. Oh, yes. So we went off to Ohio, and there was his dad, a Lutheran minister, and here two atheists were marrying each other by this pastor in a Lutheran church. And we took those vows. I was practicing my parasitic dependency in those days, so I just kind of attached to Bill and took those vows. But to me, it gave me permission to attach to him like a fungus on a tree and just drain out his life. And I proceeded to do that under the heading of love. Um, and we went off to California. He was much older than, well, 8 years older than I. And he was finishing his education. I was kind of beginning mine. So he took a job in California at a university, and we came to UCLA. That's how we got to Los Angeles and stayed there. And I'm still living there, as I mentioned. And those years were hard because I was studying and I had hopes that once I became a scientist, I'd be a happy person. And now I was in a laboratory. I was a graduate student finishing up. All I needed to do was finish my dissertation and I'd be well on my way to an academic career. And I found something there that was very helpful. You see, I had reached that place where I had pretty much gotten to the place where I knew I would be a happy person. I was a scientist, surrounded by scientists in a good laboratory. I had a research project. Why was I not happy? Well, I just still didn't fit in, even though I thought these are my people. I just felt less than, felt like a fraud. It was kind of miserable. And this was the first stage of hopelessness. And that is when you get just what you always wanted and you realize, no, that's not quite it. Then what do? I mean, I didn't have that up ahead. If only I could be there, I'd be a happy person. Well, that was worse than not getting just what I always wanted, instant gratification, which I always longed for. Getting what I always wanted and not liking it was far worse because now I couldn't imagine, what do I do now? Well, what I did now was something unexpected, but truly the first spiritual experience. And that spiritual experience came in the form of alcohol. No wonder it's called spirits. Well, we had it right there in the lab. It was a reagent, one of the chemicals we used, 90% ethanol. And that was a great drink. Mixed it with 7-Up in the vending machines, had a great old time. As you can, well, maybe you can't imagine, but you could probably guess that once that came into my life, that gave me the kind of joy, the kind of happiness that I'd looked for all of my life. You see, I could never be comfortable right in the moment. There was I don't even know what you'd call him, but a guru, I guess, Baba Ram Dass, back in the 60s, that was talking about be here now. And I thought, that is the scariest place on earth. I don't want to be here now. When I was here now, I was filled with such discomfort. And why I was so uncomfortable was that I couldn't really be here now comfortably. I was visiting the past and all the stuff I was ashamed about. I'd gotten to this lab. I wasn't doing my work. I felt bad about that. I got a bunch of bitter resentments about people back in high school that didn't understand me that I was holding on to. I was mad at Bill because he couldn't make me happy the way I wanted to be. So it must be his fault. Just all those thoughts, and then worry about the future. I can't be a scientist. That's not for me. But what is there? It's hopeless. So any state, visiting the past, visiting the future, was terrible. But I couldn't be in the here and now because that was such an uncomfortable place. I didn't like my life at all. And that's what alcohol gave me. When I drank, I got comfortable right here, right now. So, of course, I wanted to hold on to that. I did that by drinking ever more, drinking every day. And a part of alcoholic insanity for me was the delusion, should we say, that I'm doing my best work. I'm probably going to win the Nobel Prize. I was so comfortable there in the lab. And I brought in a lot of beer and stored it in the cold room. I had to have beer to get through the day. And you see, I didn't even have to go out. I stayed in a great big refrigerated room with my beer and did my work in there. I didn't have to go out because beer has so much water and sugar in it. I mean, it's a full meal. And so I could just live on that and had just hidden away there in that great big refrigerator until one day the director wanted me to write up what I'd been doing so long there in the lab. I'd always reassure him I'm doing my lot of wonderful work. It's just going so well. And so finally he said, well, write it all up, make a lab report. And that's when I knew it was all over for me. I had a lab book and I opened it up and I'd written notes. I'd written a few limericks. There was a young man from Nantucket. I'd drawn some pictures of laboratory mice. They were cute, but no research. And so I reached a new level of hopelessness and despair. So I went home, sat on the couch, and after a while realized I can't cope. There's nothing I can do now about this situation, and just mailed the keys back. And that was the end of my career. I continued to drink now, and I had to drink more than ever to get to that place where I could be where it could be even bearable in the moment, bearable in the face of terrible despair. I'd lost everything. I didn't have any friends, completely isolated there at home. Well, it was during this time that I was getting sicker and sicker. And I went to a doctor and he did some tests. And I went back to see the doctor, and the doctor leaned forward and said, I have some good news. And I thought, how could that be? I feel so terrible. I've been drinking every day, thought very unhealthy. But what is this good news? And in my great confusion, I just said, what do you mean? Good news. And he said, well, you are pregnant. I, I didn't understand. So I just blurted out, oh my gosh, I wonder if it's mine. And it was. And there were more. And my life was altogether out of control. So Bill was getting to a place where he was kind of terrified because I was in no state to take care of a child. And once that baby was born, he got real worried. And I would put baby in the car, go out and get more to drink. Before long, there was another child somewhere, either before or after the second child was born. He made sure that his mother moved in. And when she got tired, my mother would move in. So there was always adult supervision. And that put me to shame. It caused deep and terrible resentment. I resented Bill for doubting my capability. Thank God he did. It saved the children's lives, no doubt. I hated him for bringing in his mother, who clearly did not approve of me. But she talked about Alcoholics Anonymous, so I went to the program to get her to go away. I didn't go to get sober. I just went to get her to go away. And so I stayed sober for about 3 months while I went to meetings. And it was during that time that I was taken into a big group, and there was a person there named Marilyn. And she was kind of a goddess of sobriety. She would walk into a room, and the room would seem to light up, and people would surround her. And it was clear that she had a sense of purpose, a sense of humor. She was loved by many people. And I didn't have the words for it, but I would love to have what she had, whatever that charisma, whatever that magic was. I was waiting for her to come over and say, I saw you from across the room and I'd love to be your sponsor. It would just be my favorite in no time. Well, she didn't do that, of course. So I never talked to her, but I just waited for that opportunity to go home when my mother-in-law left. And finally she left and I went home too. She went home, I went home. And now I was at home with two little children. And it was determined, I'm going to not get into trouble. So the mother-in-law won't come back. My mother won't come back. I'd heard that an alcoholic can't control and enjoy his drinking. So I thought, maybe if I need to drink, I must control it because I'm not really an alcoholic. Well, I didn't need to drink for a day or two, but around 4 or 5 o'clock, the pressure would build up because Bill would come home from his lab. He was a scientist. He would come home and he would expect some food, dinner. And I just thought, doesn't he see the kind of pressure that I'm under? How can he expect that? Why didn't he bring some dinner? Well, he'd been in his lab all day. And I just thought, if I could have a couple of drinks, I could do this. So I made the rule, I'll have 2 drinks. And that worked. I was able to have a couple of drinks, get some raw food, cook the food, put it on the table. Bill came home. He was happy, fed the children. Life was good. So I thought I can just do this every day and we'll live happily ever after. But he always went back to work at night. And now there were little children and they needed baths, beds, pajamas, stories. And it had to be done in the right order. I mean, you can't have bed before baths. And then somewhere stories came in. And I couldn't keep that straight very well. And there was a lot of pressure. It was little children. And one of them would pop up and say, I've got to have a drink. I'd get him down in bed. And I'd say, wait, I'll bring you something to drink. And another would pop up. I got to pee. Wait. Here. It was just too much. If I could just have 2 more cans of beer, for example, not hard liquor, but just 2 cans of beer, I could do this. And I could. That worked. That worked so well. I think I had 2, maybe 3, maybe 5, maybe a 6-pack. I kind of lost count. We'd all end up in bed. And Bill came home and he seemed to be okay. We were all asleep. Well, in a short time, I was out in the garage coming out of a blackout. And now there were 3 children in the house and mother-in-law had moved back in. And this led me to that state of hopelessness that my sponsor talks about as we fought the good war, we lost the war. In fact, this is a little gift from my sponsor. Surrender time. We learned from Carl Jung that there were things that were needed for an alcoholic to achieve lasting sobriety. And it's achieved through hopelessness, that hopeless state where we just give up, where everything has gone to hell in a handbasket and we know there's no way out except death or insanity. We'll probably take others down with us, hopelessness. And then if that's followed by surrender, we just wave the white flag. Then there's hope. There is hope for recovery. And he tried to induce that in Roland Hazard, the hopeless alcoholic that came to him. Roland Hazard made a surrendered to Dr. Jung. And while he was with the good doctor, he stayed sober, but then he left and went through Paris. And somebody said, would you like a drink? And he said, I don't mind if I do. And that started it all again. And he was back with Carl Jung. And that's when Carl Jung told him that he was hopeless. He was trying to produce in him a conversion experience, a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience. And it's rare that that ever happened with an alcoholic such as you, he told Roland Hazard. But we are lucky because that encounter with Roland led to a series of events that involved the Oxford group, a precursor to our fellowship, meeting Ebby Thatcher, who got sober, who went to see Bill Wilson, who in turn saw Dr. Bob, and that was the beginning of our fellowship. And what was different about that from the early days with Dr. Jung was the Oxford group, because that offered what is needed after the surrender, and that is a program of recovery. Carl Jung said we have to undergo some kind of conversion experience with deep emotional displacements and rearrangements, old ideas being swept away, replaced by new ones. And that seems to happen with our steps, especially between steps 4 and 9, this process of uncovering, discovering, discarding, as the great Chuck C. used to say. Another thing my sponsor says is we can make a prayer, and that prayer is reveal what needs revealing, heal what needs healing, and then duck. And that can be a painful process. The inventory where we find out who we are and why we got into such trouble, why we needed to drink so much. Those steps 6 and 7 where I had to look at my dishonesty, my envy, my terrible resentments, the anger I felt toward people that lasted way beyond its time, the fears I had, and then the scary steps of trying to make restitution, trying to apologize to my mother-in-law, and make those relationships right, trying to be a good wife to my husband who had suffered so long, trying to be a good mom to the children, visiting the director of that lab, saying, I'm so sorry, what can I do? All of those scary things. Who knows what is essential for sobriety, but what happened to me, and I think most of us when we sincerely take these steps, is that conversion experience where the deep and terrible thirst for alcohol gets transformed into a thirst for recovery itself, a thirst to help others, to look outward for the first time in my life instead of inward. What can you do to make me happy? What can you fulfill my every wish? Why aren't you shaping up that inward looking through these steps? Somehow that focus is turned outward to others. How can I help you? How can I know a higher power? Somewhere along the way, the promise that's implied in step 12 came true for me. Having had a spiritual awakening, the thing that Carl Jung said was essential. For me, it was the veil parted, and it was, you've been there all along, haven't you? I began to see it with coincidence after coincidence. And that first coincidence in my life that changed my life once and for all was, you may recall that first time in AA, there was a person named Marilyn. And I loved her from afar. And then I drank, and I drank, and I drank. And then I called central office, February 8th, 1972, and they sent somebody to get me. And that 12-stepper took me to a meeting. And who was the speaker at that meeting? It was Marion, the one person I wanted to meet. And in my atheism, in my alcoholic fog and confusion, I knew that that was spectacular. That's mystery. I don't understand that, but I know that there is something powerful here. And when the veil parted, I saw that as that first coincidence. And I began to see that Marion became my sponsor that night when she was the speaker. And she led me through a series of steps. First, get involved in the home group, big active group, which I'm a member of today. Take a job at every meeting. Try to go to 7 meetings a week. Go to all the activities and take the steps, leading me into recovery, into a program. And that is absolutely essential. Surrender is essential, but it's not sufficient. It's not enough. It has to be followed by a program that produces that conversion experience. And once that happened, I was led out into the real world. Taking these steps has a civilizing process. And so I began to fit into the real world. I'd made amends to the director of that lab where I worked. And maybe it was an insane moment, but he called me after a few years after I made amends and asked me to come back to work there in the lab, which I did. And I didn't really like wet science any more than I did the first time around, but I got involved in writing grant proposals and doing information work, and actually went to the School of Library and Information Science and finished a program there and worked with scientific information. My specialty was medical informatics or medical information or scientific information. And so I got out of the lab where I was breaking a lot of glassware and blowing up things and got involved with computers. So everybody else was much safer and happier. And I was too, because I really enjoyed that. I did that all my career and did a little teaching too, taught information science. But in these later years, I began to teach science courses in a lifelong learning institute. That was great fun because I told you I came into the program as an atheist and I saw reason on one hand, science. You can study that. You can learn facts. You can do experiments on it. It's real. And then there's supernatural, which is unreal. You can't do experiments on it. It doesn't exist then. It's not real. Well, after taking these steps, it became very real. It's probably more real than reality in some respects. And I see now nature, the vastness of the universe, the complexity of living things, the many, many species, all the colors in nature. I see it all as a part of God's handiwork. And we're given this place to live, this universe to live in that just screams out God from all points. And I couldn't see that until the conversion experience, taking these steps, having had a spiritual awakening. Well, I was out in the world, and there's always been that temptation to begin to worship lesser gods. I found a higher power in the fellowship. That was wonderful. And while I was deeply invested in the program, that was enough. But then I went back to work and began to appreciate those lesser gods like money, property, prestige. I had a job, but I wanted a better job, more prestigious. I had a salary, but I wanted a bigger salary. I wanted your salary. I wanted more, always more. And the thing about these lesser gods is that I can never be satisfied with them because they always entice me to want more of whatever it is. If I have a house, I want a bigger house. Restlessness. And luckily, I was still tied to the program. And when I was about 18 years sober, I saw that I was beginning to put too much stock in these things in the outside and kind of apologized to my higher power. And by that time, I'd begun practicing step 11 seriously. And I even believed that I could hear the voice of God. I could hear direction. So I tuned into my higher power. I seem to have gotten too much taken up with things of the world. I'm getting away from the program. And the happy people are the ones that are super busy in Alcoholics Anonymous, working with a lot of newcomers. And I apologize. So what can I do? What can I do to get back on track? And so the answer, of course, I heard from my higher power was be of service. Go to Calcutta and turn yourself over to Mother Teresa. That's what you need to do. I heard it loud and clear. I happened to be in Israel at the time, and that's often where God really does big things. I mean, 3 major religions, for example. So I just knew that was my direction. Well, I was with my daughter who had been there for 6 months in a kibbutz after high school. So I explained that to her that I had to go to Calcutta, direction from my higher power. Now, she's not on the program. She's not an alcoholic. And she listened to me and she said, that's interesting. But why don't you talk to your friends in your fellowship when we get back to Los Angeles? Well, okay. So we went back to the States and I talked to some of the people in Alcoholics Anonymous, and their reaction was like Susie's, my daughter's. Maybe you heard the voice of God, but maybe it got a little bit scrambled in the transmission of the message. Maybe it's just get more active in Alcoholics Anonymous. How about that? I mean, you don't know the languages of India. You're not Catholic. You've got a family here. You're invested in the program here. Maybe just activities in AA. Step up your program. Well, I have found since that time, it's important to run those messages by somebody else, preferably a sponsor, friends on the program. They can usually help me sort it out. So I just certainly tune in through prayer and meditation. I listen to my higher power, but I have to clarify it with others. That's where I certainly hear the true voice of my higher power in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. We hear that in our second tradition, a loving God as he expresses himself in our group conscience. I believe that the fellowship is permeated with that presence. As long as we say yes to AA, we do get those messages we need. So I just threw myself back into the fellowship and got much happier. The more active I became, the more I got to that place that I'd been looking for all of my life. And that is what I sought alcohol for, to be comfortable in the here and the now. And I've been sober a long time, as I mentioned. I mean, it seems like a long time to me, over half a century. And recovery, in large part for me, has been moments of comfort in the here and now, and they become more frequent and they last longer as time goes by. And that's what I was really looking for all of my life. I looked around, and in those years between 18 years sober and 40 years sober, my life seemed to go very, very well. And I liked my work, but that was not the higher power in my life anymore. I began to sponsor quite a few people, and that was a great joy in my program. I had a strong sponsor in my home group. My family had healed. I got acquainted with Bill, not as a scientist, but just plain Bill. And we found so much in common. We liked cats and music, and we had fun with the children. We kind of grew up with them. Becky, David, Susie, 2 girls and a boy. They did pretty well in school and went off to the university and got good jobs. Our 2 daughters began to produce a bunch of children, my grandchildren. Life was so lovely and so good. So my story was kind of boring, but it was my story. And that's the one I had to tell. And so I was telling my story when I was 40 years sober at State Line. That's a retreat in Las Vegas once a year. Bob D has done that for quite a few years. It's just a very intense weekend of steps and traditions and concepts and history of AA and sponsorship, meeting after meeting after meeting. No golf, no swimming pools, no nothing, just meetings. It's for the real fanatics, but some of us really love it. So I was there and I had to talk, and I was talking about step 2 and saying something like, in extremis, God meets me 90% of the way. And I don't know why I said that. I hardly even knew what extremis meant, but it sounded good. So I finished, and there were frantic phone calls. And before the evening was out, family members were talking together. David did not come home from work. His young wife was very worried about him. He always came home reliably. He didn't come home Friday night. Finally, they went to his office. Police went in and found that he had hanged himself in his office. Now, he seemed to have a wonderful life. He was an elite athlete, had a beautiful young wife, stepson whom he bonded with, an elite athlete, a good career. All those things that should make life happy. He may have had my set of emotions without the reaction I have to alcohol, which made it possible to stay alive. He may have gotten just what he always wanted and realized, no, that's not quite it. We'll never know. But my world seemed to come to an end at that point. But I had a strong sponsor who said, go home, comfort your husband, drive back to Los Angeles, and be that strong point in the family and help the others get through it. Think about them. You'll have a couple of hard years of grief, but you'll survive because you'll have the support of this program. And I thought, I can't go on. This is the worst thing that could ever happen to a person. The loss of a child at any age is unthinkable. It had been unthinkable to me. But I couldn't even think about a loss to suicide. I'd heard about that in some families, but I just couldn't follow the thought of it. And this was happening. This was happening to us, to our family. Well, my sponsor was right that there was plenty of support here. Julie St. J was a good friend, and she had lost her son 10 years before, and I knew she was doing okay. She called me that next day because I had told my friend Diana. She sponsored Julie. So I began to get all of that support. The great Sandy Beach, whom we lost a few years ago, had lost his 2 daughters the year before, and he actually called me. He had heard about what had happened, and I knew him. But we became friends after that, and he had lived through that experience, and he knew the right words. The program sustained me. Julie kept saying, if you accept this, you will find that many blessings will follow. Well, I couldn't experience joy or blessings for 2 good years. And then life changed. And the first blessing, I think, that I began to notice was that through living through that unbearable experience was a kind of resilience for later losses. That was the worst thing that could ever happen to a person. And so nothing now has ever even approached that. And I find that I'm the gift of resilience. I was supported by my sponsees during that time. Sometimes those bonds work both ways. One of them, Georgia, came to pick me up, took me to meetings for a while. Other sponsees were there whenever I needed them. I got enormous help and support from them. And of course, from my sponsor, from my friends. I was elected president of this lifelong learning institute where I was teaching. Another coincidence, but it was a wonderful distraction, just what I needed at that time. that helped. That helped. Just another one of those amazing coincidences. As time went by, Bill, my husband, got frailer and frailer. He got sick after he lost his beloved son. He could not grieve in the way that I think we need to do, and it manifests as physical illness. So I became a caregiver and spent years. He was on hospice care for quite a while in the living room. And during that time, I realized that in its way, this sadness of seeing Bill decline like that and ultimate loss was a gift because I was able to care for him. I felt so guilty about being such a witch or something that rhymes with it that I just had a lot of amends to make. And so it was a privilege to be given that time to be the caring one, to take care of him. And about 5 years ago, he passed to the other side. He had come to believe during that time, and that was a beautiful thing. He had some visitors from the other side, whatever that's about. And also he knew what the program had given me and came to see that I believed and that probably that belief had some great meaning. And so when he did cross over, before he left, he said, "I'll wait for you on the other side." He knew that there would be something good on the other side. As Bill Wilson said, in the here and the hereafter, we will be fine. A year after that, my sponsor passed away. And there was a great reshuffling of sponsees. He sponsored a lot of people, as did another person in our group, matriarch, patriarch. And I began to sponsor a lot of those people. Another gift from a tragedy. So often the case when the worst possible thing happens, there are gifts from that. If you just stay around and survive the tragedy, the loss, the upset. In these last years, I got a surprise. First of all, there was the great sadness that we had lost our son. It just, I ruined Bill's life in many ways. And I too, I thought we would always have David, my son, in my old age. Well, that was not to be, not to be. And I missed that. There was a void there. But more than a year ago, I got a phone call from one of they're all my favorite grandchildren, but one of my favorite grandsons, Adam. And he called up and he said, "Grandma, I took a job in downtown LA. Could I move in with you?" And I said, "I'd love to have you." This young 23-year-old grandson moved in, and he is the delight of my life. He is gentle and kind and good and smart and wonderful in every way. And he can lift heavy things too. And he's tall, so he can reach things on a high shelf. I mean, an all-purpose grandson. I thought that I would have David, and that was not to be. But I have Adam that fills that spot that was empty. And he is such a joy, such a gift. He's not David, he's Adam. And he's a delight. We go to movies together. We went to music, to a concert together last night, and he's not ashamed to be out with Grandma. What a blessing. This program has given me so much, and so much of it was unexpected. And I suppose the greatest gift, though, besides Adam, is just to be quite a bit of the time comfortable in the here and now. And you all gave me that. Thank you.